this module, we're talking all about the leadership and the structure of our church, because the leadership and the structure so often determines how large a church can get. A lot of churches can't break 200 because they're not set up to grow past 200. But when you begin to work on the structure and work on the leadership and kind of get the right people on the right seats, on the right bus, growth can happen. So in this video, I want to talk to you about what I believe is one of the most critical roles when it comes to leadership of the senior pastor. And listen, pastor, there's nobody else that can do this except for you. There's nobody else in your church that can do what I'm about to describe in this video except for you. And it is so important to making sure your leadership and making sure your staff and your team and even your key volunteers are moving in the right direction. See, I believe the senior pastor is the chief clarity officer of the church. Now, I think it's funny with titles that people give themselves, right? I'm a CEO, and we have a COO, and there's a CMO and a CTO, and all these different stuff. And titles can be funny. I mean, there's the chief strategic thinker. There's people just have funny titles in the corporate world. You know, in church world, it's a little more cut and dry, right? There's a pastor, there's a minister of music, there's a worship leader, there's a youth pastor, there's a kids director, and a little more cut and dry. But really, what your job is as the leader of your church is the chief clarity officer. It's up to you to provide clarity around key things in your church. I think you need to clarify the mission. You need to clarify the vision. We're going to talk about that in the next module. But for around key things in your church. I think you need to clarify the mission. You need to clarify the vision. We're going to talk about that in the next module. But for the purpose of your leadership and the people around you, you've got to clarify two things for them. You've got to clarify their roles, and you've got to clarify their goals. Now listen, you should be able to do this because that rhymes. Roles and goals. What do you need to clarify? You need to clarify their roles, and you need to clarify their goals. So let's talk about those two things. The first thing you've got to clarify for your team is their roles. Here's what I mean by that. Their role is their job description in a sentence. It's where you fit. It's, hey, of all the things that you do, this is where you add the most value to our church. So if you've got an assistant, or you've got a youth pastor, if you've got an associate pastor, if you've got a worship leader, chances are they may have a job description that has a lot of stuff on it. But really what you've got to do is you've got to boil all that down into one sentence. See, I believe everybody on staff at a church, you ought to be able to say your job description on Twitter. And that's 140 characters or less. You've got to boil your role down into one sentence to or less. You've got to boil your role down into one sentence to say, of all the things I do, this is the crux of the matter. This is the most important thing. This is the single most important thing I do. Now, here's why you've got to do this. Because the people on your staff, whether they're full-time, part-time, or volunteer staff, they are like task magnets. They pick up more stuff. Like a snowball, they just pick up more stuff. So you've got this worship leader, all of a sudden he's creating videos and he's running tech and he's doing all these other things. And some of these things he's got to do because there's nobody else to do it. But some of the things that he's doing or she's doing, you didn't even ask him to do, and they're not even that important. But because people are good people and they love the church and they love Jesus and they love you, they just pick up more and more responsibilities. So it's up to you as a chief clarity officer to say, no matter what you do, this is it. This is where you're being evaluated. This is where success will come. This is where you add the most value to our church. And you've got to boil that role down into one sentence. A one-sentence job description. Not a 17-page document that ends with other duties as assigned. That is a pointless exercise in futility. Most job descriptions are utterly ridiculous because, the apostles couldn't do all those things. But boil everything down into one clear sentence. That's getting clarity around the goals, where you look at everybody around the table and say, this is the one thing you do. This is the one thing you do. This is the one thing you do. This is the one thing I do. And everybody does need to be in everybody's business on this. Everybody needs to understand what everybody's roles are at the table. Now, the second thing I said, roles. Number 2 is goals. I had a friend of mine named Matt a long time ago when I first became a pastor and had a team. I was a youth pastor for a while. But then I had a pastor, and then there was a staff. I said, Matt, I don't know if I know how to manage people really well. What's the best way to manage them? And Matt looked at me and said, the best way to manage people is by helping them set goals and then asking what you can do to help them reach them. He said, if you really want to manage people well, if you want to lead people well, you got to help them set good goals for their ministry and then just ask them what they need to meet their own goals. Like, you can hand them goals and say, here, go do this, and that's pretty weak, right? You're not excited when somebody gives you a task. But if you can help them set their goals for their ministry and then help them meet their own goals that they've set, they're going to be so much more involved in the process. So you've got to clarify roles for everybody, but you've also got to help them set clear goals. So for your youth ministry, what is your youth ministry trying to do? For your worship ministry, what are the goals? For your kids ministry, for your outreach, for missions, whatever departments or ministries you may have in your church. And we're going to talk about how many you should have because some of us are just too busy. But wherever you have a ministry or a department or an area of opportunity, you need to have clear goals where you're shooting for somebody. Now, why do you need to be involved in this? Because here's what reality is. Reality is you may have people leading ministries that have different goals that actually don't support the overall goals of the church. See, ministry goals, they need to fit inside of church goals. They need to be up underneath church goals. And so if your church goal is one thing and you've got a ministry off doing a whole other side thing, just trying to go in a different direction, there's no alignment there. And so the reason you need to talk about your goals together is because all the ministry goals need to support one another and support the overall goals of the church. So you've got to sit down with each person. So maybe you've got a part-time staff person to sit down with them and to clarify their role. Here's what you do. But I'm doing this, Pat. No, you know what? You don't need to be doing that. That actually needs to be on somebody else. This is what you do. Not in a mean way, not in a taking away way, but in a clarifying way. And you sit down with them and you clarify the roles. And then you say, all right, let's talk about that ministry now. What do you want to see happen? What does God want to do? Let's pray about this. Let's think about this. Let's strategize about this. What are we shooting for? And when you help clarify roles and goals, amazing things will happen. I have a pastor friend named Robbie. Robbie was a worship pastor, and he actually became an executive pastor at a church. The church was growing. Robbie actually hired me to consult with him for several months. And so we would get on Skype and we would talk through this and we worked through this exercise. And Robbie did the hard work of clarifying roles and goals. And it resulted in shuffling a few people around, moving a few responsibilities, getting people in the right seat on the bus. Robbie emailed me just a few weeks ago and he said, Michael, you wouldn't believe what's happened. I mean, our church has grown. Our church has grown by hundreds of people. I mean, we've had the highest attendance we've ever had. Everybody's in their sweet spot. People are doing the right things. There's incredible clarity around what everybody's doing. And it's all because Robbie started and he spent several months focusing on roles and goals and getting the right people in the right seats on the right bus. So if you can define roles and goals, your team, right? Your leadership team, it won't be all on you. Now you'll have a team of people will be focused on the right things and growing the church. And as you focus on the leadership and on the structure in your church, you'll realize that you'll grow in a healthy way beyond 200. So that, Pastor, you are the chief clarity officer. You've got to define roles and goals. So here's your homework. In this particular module, I've given you an Excel spreadsheet. And you can take it, you can print it out, you can make your own if you want. But it's a template where you can write down all the people who have roles in your church. And listen, they may be full-time, they may be part-time, they may be key volunteers. This works for all three of those levels. And where you can write their name, their title if they've got a title. You can write their roles and you can write their goals. And that should be a shareable document that you share with everybody so that everybody knows, here's what I do, here's what I'm trying to accomplish. And that brings incredible clarity. Clarity comes when you grab it and when you say, I am the chief clarity officer and I'm going to clarify roles and goals for everybody that works on this team.